reference made to it.
I never would have imagined that that would grow to 100,000 acre fire.
You know, look at how many homes. Outrageous. Really sad. Yeah, I wouldn't want to lose my house.
I know.
I could not replace the stuff in my house.
Spencer, I think he's got a couple houses in Bell Canyon that burned down.
Spencer?
Well, that he insures. I mean, he doesn't own them, that would be nice. And then Bob had 2 in Malibu, 1 in Westlake Village. The house wasn't harmed, but they lost 55 trees. It's a huge piece of property.
Yeah.
10,000 square foot house, and all their landscaping.
Oh, wow.
And, yeah.
It's millions of dollars.
I don't know how I would feel if I had to evacuate and worry about whether my house was gonna burn down or not.
Yeah, they did though.
I'd actually stay and try to keep the fire off my house.
I know.
But that's just
But
a
one
man.
guy died who
Yeah.
stayed behind.
Well, he's an old man. That one guy they just found?
Yeah, in
There's a-
Malibu, right? The guy in Malibu.
The guy at the top of that hill. He's an elderly man, and he didn't evacuate. But they don't know whether he was inside the house or outside the front door when he perished. He might have been trying to get out, but he had a stroke, a couple of strokes in the past. So, you know, he probably physically wasn't in the best shape.
And then there was 2 people, I forget where that was, that they thought maybe it was a murder, like a homicide.
Oh, the ones that were found dead in the car in somebody's driveway, they probably got, they're thinking that they got confused and possibly thought that that driveway was a street
Oh.
and pulled into it and just got trapped.
Why did they say though they thought they were murdered?
They said they were going to investigate. They were gonna treat it as a homicide until they determined otherwise.
Oh.
Because they always do that unless they know that it wasn't a homicide, it's obvious. Then they treat it as a homicide. Couple minutes after 7.
Brad said he's coming, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, he sent me a note saying that he would be here, so.
Give it a couple minutes. Is it more than that, or is it just me? I don't know why I wore a sweatshirt.
So are we getting claims for homes that were destroyed?
Or partial, you know, yeah. In Malibu, one home was completely destroyed.
Wow.
And some just had to, if it's a mandatory evacuation, then the loss of use on the policy pays for that, you know, while they have to go to a hotel or whatever.
Yeah.
One guy, though, he's got 4 dogs, so he had to rent a house. He's gonna be out for a while. His house is a mess.
But imagine if your home burned down, the contractors will not be available.
Yeah.
They'll have
No, I
more
know.
jobs than whatever.
It's gonna take a while.
Was there not an October meeting?
These are September, do we have a meeting? Oh, no, we didn't have.
We didn't have one in
Yeah,
September.
no, we didn't.
That's when I wanted the council to hear DWP, and
Right.
folks wanted it to go through the committee first.
So there was or there was not a meeting in October?
No, there wasn't.
Guess we're stuck with no AC. Not working.
Well, we have a quorum.
We can start, I guess. I don't know. Brad's running late to a lot of stuff lately.
Okay.
Is he working or no?
No, not like a real job. He has things he does for the library.
Mhm.
Okay, let me just get us water and we gotta start. Okay, I'm gonna call the meeting to order. This is the Environment Committee meeting, November 14th, 2018. It is 7:07. We have 3 committee members present, which is a quorum. That's Shar, myself, and Alec. Welcome to our West Hills NC Environment Committee meeting. My name is Steve Randall, and Alec Uzemek and I co-chair this committee. During tonight's meeting, we will be discussing the items that are listed on the meeting's agenda. There are copies of the agenda available to you here on the table. The agenda contains a list of the items that we will be discussing during tonight's meeting. We will proceed with each agenda item in numerical order. Before we make a decision on any item, members of the public will be provided the opportunity to comment on the item that we are considering. In order for you to speak and be heard on any agenda item, you will be called on by me when it is your turn to speak. In order for me to know that you want to speak, you can just say raise your hand. We don't need the speaker cards. Each person will be allotted 2 minutes for their comment. If you have a general comment on an item that is not listed on the agenda, you may make your comment during the public comments portion of the meeting. Again, there's only one person in the audience, so we're going to forego the speaker card. Just indicate if you want to make a public comment at the time. You will be allotted 2 minutes for your comment. Please understand that certain laws apply to limit our discussion only to the items listed on the agenda. These laws prohibit our ability to respond to public comments and limit the actions that we may take during tonight's meeting. Thus, we may be legally prohibited from acting on a concern that you expressed on a non-agenda item. However, please note that your concern may become the topic of discussion at a future meeting of our committee only after we have been able to list the item on the agenda. When a person is speaking, they're entitled to courtesy and respect. There should not be any other discussion occurring in the room. If you want to chat with your neighbor, please take that discussion outside while our meeting is in session. We will treat one another with respect during this meeting. That means we act with civility and decorum. We do not boo or hiss when disagreeing with someone's point of view. Any competing viewpoints may be articulated without the need for inappropriate or uncivil actions. Lastly, please silence your cell phones. Okay, we've already established a quorum. Minutes are being taken by Alec. We have the minutes from the September meeting, so let's look those over and see if anybody has any changes they want to have made. Anybody have any corrections?
Under old business, it says that the DTSC demolition plan for several buildings in Area 4 was reviewed, including a US EPA SOP for the demolition and disposal of building debris. The controversy, that and the being encouraged to have their comments done for this that didn't occur. That wasn't provided by this committee, so I request that that be removed from these minutes because that is inaccurate.
I'll review the video, but I think this was discussed. And,
Well, I
the
request
issue-
that it be reviewed because I believe it was not.
Okay,
I actually
will-
complained that it was not, so, and that was as a result of it not happening. So I request that you do that.
Okay, so,
I will review the video and correct it if necessary.
well, or we can put off approving these minutes, because that's a big part of them.
To the best of my knowledge, this is what happened. If we go ahead and approve it, then I'll come back with a document that says we have to change it.
I have a question. Why does it say August 8th at the bottom,
It's just
at the very bottom of the
That's a
page?
typo, that has to be changed when you print these. It's a footer.
Oh, like you're going
It's
back to
it's
a previous.
It's a footer, and you have to go in
I
and
got you.
specifically change it. Yes,
Okay.
Can I ask another question about August 8th?
Mhm.
There's a video online of me. There's no videos of anybody else. I request that those videos of me be taken down.
No, I saw a video.
They're on your website, and I feel that's inappropriate, and I request that they be taken down.
That,
Okay.
My head isn't even included. It is certainly not done with the intention of informing anyone. I feel ridiculed and dehumanized and disparaged, and I request that it be taken down.
Was that the meeting that you did a presentation at?
Yes, it is.
Okay, that. you
I wasn't a headless horseman. I request it be taken down.
You raised this issue before, and this actually isn't the appropriate time to discuss this. We're really approving minutes.
Can
Yeah,
we
let me
finish
get back
with
to
the
that.
minutes and then come back to this issue?
Sure. What do you think we should do?
About this?
Yeah,
I mean, that's
I
the
don't
way
think-
I remember it, but I'd
Okay.
have to see the tape too. I don't know.
I'll-
mean, I
I'll be
remember-
happy to go back and get the tape.
Okay.
So
I definitely remember,
table this for the time being.
yeah, let's just table it.
okay, that's fine.
Table it, and we'll bring it up at the next meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, comments from the chair. I don't have anything. If you have something, please feel free.
Just as an introduction, I arranged to have someone from DWP come and speak to the council.
Mhm.
And you might remember at the last operations meeting, they did not want a presentation, at least prior to the presentation being made to the committee. I went back to that individual and she was upset. She was not gonna come out with 3 or 4 people. And so the task of discussing the DWP falls to me, which is good, because I got some surprises for you.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So let's go on to public comments. Christina raised an issue. You raised that a couple of times during the last month or few weeks. And it was run by the people that tell us how to run things from the city of Los Angeles.
Why aren't any other videos of anybody else on your website? Why is it
That's
only
what-
of me?
Well, that's when we started doing the videos. We've only done, this is, I think, what, the 4th week?
I thought the video was.
Well, then
of
there
the
should be
meeting.
4 videos. There's only one of me. And I think that's inappropriate.
Well, if the others haven't been put up yet, they will.
Yeah.
They will be put up.
Well, then I request that in the future, when you're gonna video me doing a presentation, that you actually include my head. Because that was just
You know, I-
disparaging
That
and
was a
dehumanizing,
video of the
and I
meeting,
didn't
wasn't it?
appreciate it at all.
Yeah, I don't remember where your head was.
We'd have to take a look at it,
Well,
but I don't
if
remember.
I can't even prove that the video is the video, then there's really no point in having a discussion because it's intentional. I get it.
No,
Thanks.
No, it's not intentional.
Yes, it is,
The
because you would
gentleman-
take it down at my request otherwise, because
Do you
it's
think
certainly
that-
not helpful to
Why
anyone.
why would you think that the gentleman who took the video would deliberately cut your head off in the video?
I don't have any idea. I just
Well,
think
he's
it's,
sitting right there, you wanna ask him?
No, I
He's-
don't think
he's
we're.
not,
why did you do that?
I don't remember intentionally doing anything other than shooting what I saw. And
Well, I was the only one
moving
talking,
time,
and my head was
your
cut
head
off.
in the picture unless you were moving too fast for me to capture you.
right, so, I'll have to take another look at the video, cause quite frankly, I saw the video. and I
The
didn't-
continued
I never even
disparagement
noticed it.
is something I don't appreciate,
It's
and I
not.
request it be taken down.
Okay, we
Um,
will consider that, and
Didn't we ask if we could take the
We
videos
did.
down, and the city
We were
said
told no.
no?
Yeah.
We were told no, but I
They
thought
said that you're
this-
required to show videos only of Christina Walsh.
No,
I would
we
like
were-
to know who told you that.
the
No.
video.
I'll
were
make a
in the
public
video.
records act request
We were
to
in the-
find out and see if you follow that
Video.
one, since you didn't follow the last one.
Christina,
Yes, I
video-
did. I don't
videos-
know why you keep
All right,
saying.
we have
You
to-
just responded to
we're
me
not
saying
gonna-
you were
Okay,
refusing.
we're done.
Did that not happen?
We're done, we are not,
Christina,
no,
I
stop
sent
engaging
it
her,
to
we
you.
are not gonna engage you in an argument, Christina, I'm sorry. But we've told you what we were told, those are the facts, and that's, fine.
One more thing I did want to add is the night that you gave the presentation, I don't think anybody realized that you were going to leave immediately afterwards because it did bring up a lot of
You
questions.
didn't ask a single question
We
to
didn't get the
me.
chance.
You,
Didn't get the
no, you
chance.
didn't ask me a single question. You said
Let's-
I
let's
was
not-
out of
let's
time,
not go on
This is
all
and then
that.
you waited until I
All right,
left and
this
made a
is not-
separate video.
This is not
It's
appropriate.
on your own website, so arguing about what it says is ridiculous. I've requested that those be taken down because instead of engaging me as if it was actually sincere, instead, you didn't ask me a single question, didn't even look at me. You videoed me without my head, and then,
Excuse me,
after I
you're not
left,
supposed to have
you
a cross-talk.
disputed
true.
and
Public comment.
refuted my entire presentation while I had already left.
We're not-
That was disrespectful and certainly not for the purpose of informing anyone, and
Thank
you know it.
Thank you
I
for-
would have liked you to
that-
stick
stop.
around and answer questions.
We can't,
I
we
know,
cannot
you're
engage
right.
people in public
You're
comment.
correct.
Thank you for your thoughts.
You're
We
correct.
do understand your feelings, we'll look into it, okay? All right, so let's move on
Okay.
to new business, and Alec, you were going to
Yeah,
take this.
I've got a lot of information that I think is necessary. The reason I got into this drinking water thing, which led to groundwater and all these other things, is that in CME, the council was proposing to do a study on using water that was treated and had perchlorates removed, and the public was so incensed that the council backed off. So I thought, well, this would be an interesting subject for us to discuss with the water that's in Los Angeles. So that's how I got into this. The DWP is where all my information came from, and I'll go through that with you. But just to give you some idea of the size of DWP, their annual budget is $6.1 billion. They have 9,400 employees. It was founded in 1902, and then in 1917 it started delivering electricity. The water supply that the city has are a number of areas. There's the LA Aqueduct from the eastern Sierra Nevada, which I think is through the Owens Valley. Purchased water, which comes from the Bay Delta and the Colorado River, is probably the biggest one. So the aqueduct is 30%, the purchased water is 60% roughly. Groundwater is 12%, very important. Groundwater is 12%, we're talking about the whole city here. And recycled water is 2%. To all customers, DWP delivers 167 billion gallons of water each year, an enormous amount. and has 119 reservoirs and pump stations and so on. It is a huge undertaking. The city has determined that they need to develop other sources of water. And that is because the drought, water is becoming more expensive, and there are other people in other states who are competing for the same supply from the Colorado River. So they've gone back and they've had a very intense program, water conservation. The water level that's being used today is what it was in the 80s, even though they added 1 million people to the population. Now you flush a toilet and it uses 1 liter of water. Using water for lawns is regulated and so on. So the conservation program has been underway and I think was very successful. The next thing they decided is that they're going to use recycled water.
So you're not gonna bring up the Woolsey Fire at all?
But
You're not gonna mention the Woolsey Fire in this committee meeting?
there's no fire tonight. So
The impacts of West Hills aren't relevant? That's amazing.
It's not on the agenda. The agenda has to be done 72 hours in advance.
The fire's been going on for 6
I'd like to
days.
proceed with my presentation if I
Sure.
could. So, the city is using recycled water, which is water that comes out of the sewers and goes through Hyperion, and that water goes through purple piping for irrigation of various parks, golf courses, and so on. And you can even get this recycled water if you want to take a barrel over there. They'll give you 30 gallons that you can use on your lawns or whatever. But we're going to come back to that. I think it's very important. The other thing that they have been doing and will expand is the stormwater capture, which occurs largely in the canyons. The stormwater will be in the canyons and will be used to support the groundwater. They'll allow it to percolate into the soil. And they're looking into things like berms and permeable pavement, of all things, to try to get the water back into the groundwater. The city has been determined that they need to do something different, and they've set a goal for themselves. And that goal is they're going to reduce their reliance on imported water to 50% of the water supply by 2035. So these other sources are going to have to make up an enormous shortfall. The largest supplier of groundwater is the San Fernando Basin. Supplies the majority of groundwater to the entire city. And with the contamination that has occurred in the groundwater, it's gone from 30% of the total water supply, and now it's gone down to 15% because they've stopped using certain wells that have contaminated water. And so the city is under enormous pressure to replace this water. They are operating under the federal government and also the State Water Resources Board, which sets the standards for drinking water, and they are monitoring the water, I think, a couple 100,000 times a year to make sure that they're meeting their requirements. As I went through this, the big thing that's coming out of all of this is that the groundwater is a very important subject. The groundwater will become the storage facility for water. I made it very clear. And the condition of the groundwater is extremely important, particularly in those areas that are contaminated. So the way it works is they gather the storm water together and try to get it to a spreading basin where it percolates into the soil and goes back into the groundwater. And they're trying to enlarge that. They've been doing it for some time, but they're trying to enlarge it. They'll probably build more dams, and they'll have a centralized stormwater capture facility established, and I think that's under construction. As I mentioned, they're gonna have infiltration swales, permeable or
Who
pervious
is?
pavement, rain gardens, rain barrels, and so on to try to capture the stormwater. Now, this is stormwater that occurs in the canyons and so forth. This is not runoff that we have through the storm drains. That's a separate issue. And they have never addressed that as a source of water. And I think because it picks up oil and other contaminants that are very difficult to deal with. So, San Fernando Valley is the battleground for the groundwater. It supplies 87,000 acre feet out of 109, so it's roughly 80% of the total water supply for Los Angeles. As I said, the contamination has been a major problem, and the contamination is largely occurring at the east end of the valley. We're talking about Glendale, Burbank, those cities over at the east end that have been contaminated by prior, I think, aerospace companies. And the contamination is largely TCE, which we've heard about elsewhere, DCE, PCE, and a whole bunch of alphabetical things. But the contamination is so large and extends for such a large area that EPA was called in about 10 years ago to do a study to characterize where this plume, they call it a plume, is going. And the plume is not contained. They originally thought when they put in 2 treatment plants that those treatment plants would contain the contamination. It has not. The contamination has expanded. So DWP determined that they will treat the most contaminated water in order to prevent it from going to less contaminated water. So the battleground is over in North Hollywood, Burbank, Tonga, and so on, where they are building more and more water treatment plants. And when they treat the water for these contaminants to the level as drinking water, they allow it to percolate into the ground. So it goes back into the groundwater. The groundwater becomes a really big deal as you go through this. I didn't realize it. But pure water that goes to Hyperion will provide water for plant salons, but it will also have super purified water that'll go into the groundwater.
Sounds good.
And has been going into the groundwater. So if there's a complaint, there's something, this is sort of in the back pages. I was surprised, and apparently that's one of their plans is to use that water, to use it as a supply. At Hyperion, the treatment process is 4 parts. It's preliminary treatment where organic solids are removed. Secondary treatment is biological treatment. Organisms are added and the water is aerated so that the solids will go to the bottom and they can filter those out. Tertiary treatment of water passes through sand filters while the remaining solids are removed. And the last part of the process of microfiltration, et cetera, et cetera. Well, on top of this, they're trying to develop that super purified water, and I didn't get the information on that. This is just the routine water that's being recycled. The treated water goes into the soil, the recycled water goes into the soil, and storm water goes into the soil. So as it turns out, the battleground is in the groundwater. Conservation and so on is so that it can cut down the usage of the supply, but everything else DWP is doing is to try to get the groundwater back to where it's replenished. The treatment part, they've established 2 or 3 plants in, they call it North Hollywood West. So I guess North Hollywood's split up in east and west, but they have almost 100 monitoring wells where they're monitoring, and the city is still pulling out groundwater to use for drinking purposes. So it's very important to them that they know where the contamination is, and they're able to avoid the contamination while they're still pumping water into the drinking water system. But they're adding, EPA and DWP have determined, as I said before, that the contamination has not been contained, so they're building another 3 or 4 treatment plants in that area to try to bring it back to where it should be. In terms of cleanliness, and once again, once it's treated, then it gets pumped back into the soil and percolated back into groundwater. The new plants that they're building, many of them will be completed in 2020, 2021, and they're really going after this because I think everybody has come to realize just how important that groundwater is to the city and also to future occupants. So they're spending an enormous amount of water on the treatment part of groundwater. The drinking water that comes from Northern California and from the Sierras and Colorado and so on, that's interesting, and they maintain the cleanliness, but that's not where the battle is. The battle is with the groundwater, and I was surprised just how much effort is being put in to purify the groundwater. As I said, going back to the very beginning, the groundwater is a major component of what the city uses, and it's diminishing because of the contamination. So the EPA and DWP are trying to turn that around. And that's where it ended. Like I say, I was surprised at the direction. I thought this was going well. It's just simply conservation. No, it's not. It's conservation, it's stormwater, it's treatment, it's recycling, it's all those things to get the water purified and back into groundwater, which will eventually be used for our purposes.
Greywater has been being recycled in a lot of communities. Doesn't make it sound any more palatable, but you know.
Yeah, it's being recycled, but I think there's a recognition of just how valuable water is, and it's going to become scarce. There's the drought that's creating a problem, and there's competition for the water, and then that's resulting in increased prices that are being passed on to the consumers. So it is a big deal. The thing is, as you look through the other statistics on how many miles of pipe they have and how many reservoirs they have, it's a huge conglomeration. I didn't realize it. The reservoirs are another big issue. The reservoirs, they have 119 reservoirs, and the federal government has asked for cleanliness levels that require covering the reservoirs. So DWP has covered 2 or 3. They're going to cover 2 or 3 more. The most recent one is the one on Sepulveda where they put in those black plastic balls to cover it, which stops organic growth and so on. But they're definitely going after this full force. And not only the federal government, but the state of water resources is right on their backs telling them they have to do that. The other thing is that the laws have been passed that give the agencies authority to go after groundwater in their various areas. So there's a recognition at the state level that says you guys have the authority now, and we're going to back you up on making things happen. And of course, there's the criminal part of it where they're going after people who are responsible for the contamination, but that's another story. But I think there's a recognition that it's there, it needs to be cleaned up, and we're using the resources that we have immediately. Any questions?
I do.
Sure.
Okay, so, once the water is treated through the treatment plant, you're saying they're putting it back into the groundwater?
Yes. What they do is they have areas established where the water just sits
Mhm.
and it soaks into the soil.
Mhm.
I'll give you an example. There's one of these at Tampa and Rinaldi. There's a big, huge reservoir there. That is for repercolating the water back into the groundwater. And their actions seem to be, everything they do is to put the water back into the groundwater.
Seems kind of strange though, because if they're taking it out of the soil because it's contaminated, treating it and then putting it back into the soil, that kind of seems like a catch-22. How could it not become contaminated again?
Well, I think what they're hoping is, as they reiterate the process and keep doing it, that they'll lower the overall level of the contamination. But as they pull water out and treat it, it's sort of, their initial thought was is that it would hold the contamination in place. Well, as it turns out, it has not. The treatment there hasn't been sufficient treatment to keep the contamination bounded. It's spreading.
Right, that
So if
kind
they
of seems
pull it up and
logical.
treat it, then maybe this contamination will contract. I don't know.
I
It's
don't
a
know.
very
Sounds
complicated
like a weird
subject.
plan. So now I know that in operations, we've discussed having D as a, DWP, not D, as a forum. Are you considering that, or?
No, and I'll tell you why. We had the DWP guy come talk to the council, I think about a year, 2 years ago, and they talked about the water bill and all of
Right.
these things, but they didn't tell you what was behind it
Mhm.
and what the treatment was and the plants they're building and the recycled and stormwater things that they're building. I don't think it's worthwhile having DWP come in unless they're gonna give us a full blown thing, and I can look
They're not
into it.
willing to do that?
They are willing to come in and do it, but I have to sit down with this lady and talk to her and see how much knowledge she has. Because if she's not gonna talk about the groundwater and the recycling and the water treatment,
Mhm.
she's just gonna talk about the bills and,
Yeah,
pipes
yeah,
that they've
no.
replaced. That
Yeah.
doesn't do us any good.
And we have, I think even they came to Hidden Lake some years before that, remember?
Yes.
And it was also, although they did talk about bringing the water in from Colorado and
Mhm.
something else, I forget.
But that, to me, I think you're asking a valid question, and to me, I'm concerned that somebody comes in and just wastes their time
Right, yeah.
without telling us. If somebody comes in and says, well, the water costs a lot coming in as a source, well, they totally ignored the capital investment that's required for the treatment plants and the recycling and all that other stuff, which doesn't come to mind because you don't see in the newspapers or anything else.
Right.
So I felt this was a very worthwhile project for myself.
And you said 60% is coming from the Colorado River now, right? Is that what you said?
60% is coming from the Delta up north and the Colorado River.
Oh, a combination.
A combination, so that water trench and so on that comes from the north is a major supplier. But groundwater is down to 12%. At one time, it was up around 30%. And
It was probably cleaner at the time.
by far, the largest supplier of groundwater is the San Fernando Valley Basin.
Doesn't sound good.
So it's right on our doorstep.
Okay.
Excellent study.
Mhm.
I thought it was worthwhile. I'll take on the look into having someone come and speak to us.
Okay.
But I think it's a little surprising that there's so much of this going on that's taking so much, and we sign up water bonds. We've done that
Right.
for 2-3 years in a row now, billions of dollars, without understanding this capital investment that's going on over here.
Mhm.
If I can get somebody to come in and give us a complete explanation, I'll try to do that.
Right. Did you speak to Joanne about, I know she knows people in that agency.
Yeah, she put me on to some names and I phoned and you know how you get referred,
Yeah.
and finally I found the lady who makes the presentations. But I'm, like I say, I'm just concerned that it's not sufficiently technical. So we'd have to somehow or other, maybe she'd give me a copy of her briefing beforehand so we could see if it's gonna be worthwhile.
Okay, all right. And they never spoke about the West Valley water?
No.
Because it's all tied into the, coming from the same
No,
place.
Maybe I skipped past that. I was looking at it also because the maps that they have and all of the activity is at the East Valley.
Mhm.
And they say in some of their narrative that they prioritize the contamination throughout the valley.
Okay,
And their high priority for the pump and treat is they want to go to the highest contamination, try to deal with that before it spreads even further, as opposed to some of the lesser. We know that perhaps there's some contamination over here on the west side, but not sufficient, or at least it doesn't compare anywhere near to this huge plume that exists at the east end.
East End, okay. And then we don't have any of those, what do they call those, the saltwater treatment plants?
You mean the water treatment?
Mm-hmm. Well, no, where they take the ocean water.
No,
We don't have any of
we
those.
don't have any of
anywhere.
those.
San Diego does, I know.
Yes, part of the problem that CIMI has, that makes everybody nervous is, the west end of CIMI, the water table's above the ground where they built Target, Walmart, and so on. So there are 2-3 pumps that are working 24/7, pumping water into the ocean to keep the water table down so that these businesses can exist. And it's at Los Angeles Street and Madeira. But that's the way they'll keep coming. So that water, if we could use it, or CIMI could use it, I think it would be an excellent point.
What was, so when they test that water, what does that come out like?
Boy, this is great. I'm glad you're asking this. They tested it and they found perchlorate in the water that they're pumping out. And they didn't understand why the perchlorate was there, because there's no plume, there's no evidence that brings it back to SSFL. It's just there in the West Simi Valley. And the best answer they could come up with is that there were orange groves there that were using fertilizer. And they thought maybe that was the source of the perchlorate. But in any case, a large part of this water, if you want to use it, you're gonna have to treat it. And if it becomes really expensive, maybe it makes sense.
I mean, it's almost like anywhere where you have a population, you know, for any length of time, for decades, you're gonna, I think you're gonna have contamination in the water, wouldn't you think?
I think you're right, and I think the groundwater has to be examined and treated appropriately for whatever it is. And CIMI does not take very much water out of the ground. I think they only have 2 or 3 wells, and those wells supply the water for the golf courses at the northeast end of the valley. The rest of it was all purchased and goes through, I guess, water company and so on. They have an open reservoir, by the way, that I went and visited, and they're allowed to keep it open so long as they build another treatment plant that's specific for that. They don't have to cover it if they have special treatment, and they did that. They installed that special treatment.
Kinda
Other
like
than
double-
that, the water's.
Like double work.
I'm sorry?
It's like double work,
Yes,
you know?
but in CIMI, they have a lot of tanks up on the hills, and that water is okay. They don't have to treat it. But if you're gonna have a reservoir, open reservoir, you must treat it again.
Yeah.
Double treatment, yes.
Yeah, what I find amazing is that they can't go back and trace the source of the perchlorate.
No.
You would think that,
That's a very important question, because the source may exist and may be adding to the problem as we go. So before any cleanup occurs, you have to determine exactly what you're saying, is go back and see if the source is still alive.
Right.
Yeah, because, that's my concern with, the baseball field, West Hills baseball. That if there's, number one is the contamination in the water, the soil there, and if there is, how do we trace it back to the source? So
Well,
I'm concerned about the ability to do that.
This is an interesting conversation because it's very current. The fire is up in SSFL, and there are people who claim that the radioactive particles are being carried down and putting everyone in danger. So they all went and marched on Barger's office, which is great. They gave her a kick in the butt. She calls county health services to come out, which we've never been able to get them to come out. She calls them, they come out and they examine it and they say there's no danger. Well, that's fine. I think that the right thing happened. So if we have a problem where it's contaminated water, we think it's contaminated, we should go back after the supervisor and get her to call the health department for us, because they do not respond to calls otherwise.
Right. Barger is the ticket.
Yeah, well, I think Melissa and some other folks went there and they did a good job. They got her motivated to do something. That's fine.
Well, I'm glad it was tested.
Yeah, so.
Actually, they haven't had access to the site, so it's really not possible for them to do all the sampling they claim.
So I think a very important process to try to find out if there is a contamination and is there a source, and then does it need to be cleaned up or build a fence around it or do something? So, yeah, I think it's appropriate. And I like the idea that Barger responded to the public. Maybe that says that she'll do that again in the future.
Christina?
Yeah, I have a question. How do you build a fence around the smoke? The entire site burned. It is a moonscape now. So the contaminants that include regular dioxin from fire, but also contaminants from the site, are going to be randomly distributed across Southern California. So I would hope that you all would help inform people so that they protect themselves. A long way toward protection can be accomplished by simply restricting outdoor exercise, not having kids outside, having people replace their filters in their homes, maybe do that every week for the next 6 or 7 weeks, and wipe down all of their indoor surfaces, because you're going to have a situation where you have contamination trapped inside your home. People, when they've already identified 30 schools that require decontamination, why shouldn't people be informed so that they can decontaminate and clean their own homes? Up at Santa Susana, they used Kotex to clean the surfaces, and that is what they did during the nuclear meltdown, or afterwards. And that was because it's absorbent. The modern day version of that is Swiffer pads. I've been doing a test on a table I resurfaced every single day, and it's black every day, even though I've been extremely diligent about keeping my doors closed. So that's inside my house, and I have not been in the way of the ash in a way that I could really see, except for one of those 6 days. Many people have had serious smoke for all 6 days. So I would hope that instead of doing cartwheels to defend the polluter, you would do something to protect the public. Thanks.
We're waiting for the results.
You don't need results to protect people.
Excuse me. We're waiting for the results of the air monitoring that is set up on site, which I personally was taken on a tour of. And so they are monitoring the air. We will get more information.
When were you taken on a tour of that?
About 2 months ago.
Okay, so the power lines have been down since the fire, so they haven't been able to access the site very well. So how can they know? In fact, documents show that they air monitor at Burbank.
Yeah, we're getting off track.
DTSC has said there's no danger, but they will continue to monitor and they will use these air monitor
He also wrote a
stations.
letter saying it was
Let me
clean when
finish,
no cleanup
please.
has happened,
Let
so.
me finish. They will check these, and those stations were set up specifically for VOCs and radionuclides. So DTSC will have access to it.
Well, we look forward to that
The public
data.
health statement that came out today or yesterday says also they don't find any danger, but they will examine the air sampling to make sure that what they say is correct. I don't think there's enough evidence to get people tied into SSFL yet, but there's 2 agencies that are working on it. If it comes out.
The fire
it's
started
fine.
at SSFL. I'm just talking about protecting people from the fire.
We've been.
This is
there.
the environmental committee, and the fire is affecting everyone. That's what I'm asking, about informing people
Well, what
so
about
that they can
public
protect
safety?
themselves.
We were told that only 50% of the SSFL property was exposed to the fire. And that's an important fact because we don't know if the 50% that was exposed was the contaminated portions. I suspect it was not. I saw some photographs, for example, the burn pit.
Right.
I saw
According to
photographs
the
of burn pit
cleanup
that did not
map,
show
the whole
any-
site is
Please don't
contaminated.
interrupt, Christina. I read something at the beginning about.
Well, you're saying, making false statements, and I think that's really unfortunate.
You know, Christina, part of what we do is to allow everybody to have their own opinion and to speak and not be rude.
That is not what you did to me when I made a request at the beginning of this meeting, and there's nobody else here, so for
Okay,
this
well, if
farce
you
to
think-
go on.
Christina, if you think that that's what happened, it is memorialized on a videotape, and I'm more than happy
Excellent.
to let you see it. As a matter of fact, that videotape will be made public, so if I did something untoward towards you, it will be on videotape. I don't think
Excellent.
it's gonna show anything. But as I was saying, is that I did see photographs of some contaminated areas that obviously.
They didn't include
were
the
not
RMHF, which is the most contaminated area.
All right, I'm done with that. Do you want to move to the next subject, which is discussion, possible action of future committee projects?
Yeah, I need some guidance as to what direction to go. The DWP thing, I will follow up on that and try to get some information to see if we can get a technical person in. But I think I need some guidance from the committee as to what direction we should be going.
Well, I mean, I'm most concerned, as I think we should be, with environmental issues that affect West Hills proper. Because, every community needs to, we can't run shotgun on the whole Southern California. I'm concerned about groundwater contamination that could have, yes or no, come from Santa Susana Field Lab. I'm concerned about air contamination, but we'll know more about that once we get results from the air monitoring. Those are my main concerns at this time.
Well, I think the one that you're bringing up is a good one, and that is groundwater contamination. Many people are out there saying that the groundwater is contaminated in certain locations. You shouldn't buy a house because the TCE and other contaminants come out and poison you. I don't believe that stuff is coming out, but it would be interesting to find somebody who is versed in that come and tell us, are homes that are sitting on contaminated water in danger? I think that's an appropriate subject that someone should tell us, and perhaps I can get DTSC to come and talk to us about that.
Yeah, anything that's a danger to the public, and it's just as important that if it turns out that a danger does not exist, or that contamination levels are below the point at which they are dangerous to somebody's health, that we'd be able to set people's minds at ease on that as well.
Right.
So, we have to, our job is to report back to the community whatever the facts are, and we have to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think obviously it should be about West Hills, because that's what our job is. I think we need to, I do think we need to get somebody to investigate the baseball field,
I agree.
because that seems to be such a big issue.
I agree. I
So-
think that somebody should look into I think the creek runs through there.
Mhm,
I think that the water in that creek needs to be tested.
mhm.
And if it shows that there's some kind of contamination, I think that at that point, it's pretty easy to trace back to where it's coming from. And I suggested that to John Berg months ago. To my knowledge, nobody's taken any steps or made any effort to move forward on checking that water.
Well, I think.
Outfall two leads to
I
that.
think if it is a concern and we want to talk about it,
They
I think
never
we've been
sampled
shown
there.
the way, and that is to go to our county supervisor.
Barger?
Yeah, Barger.
Whatever.
Maybe
And
we should
ask
do that.
her,
Okay.
Why don't we do
because
that?
it's the health department that we're talking about now.
Mhm.
Because I'd like to find out, I mean, if there's contamination at that baseball field, I mean, all the kids and everybody are there,
Mhm.
you know, and I think that the fact that we have several incidences of cancer from people who are working there, you know, the coaches, that there's enough question there, you know, there's enough to act on. And I think we
The
need.
downside is, we don't have all our ducks in the row, because we've never we've talked to John, he's the only one, and we really don't have really much information even from him. So we don't really know these four
Who the
people,
other
what their
people are.
background is,
Yeah.
what kind of cancer,
It's
how,
true.
you know, like, we don't really know what we're talking about at this point. I think Henry Stern's office would help too. Remember when
Yes.
that guy that we met at the school that
Mhm.
day? He handles the environment committee for Henry Stern. I think that would be a good place to go as well.
Yeah, it would be nice to be able to get some more information, but
Mhm.
Well,
nobody's giving us the
I don't think
information.
it's up to us to determine the cause of cancer and so
No.
on.
No,
But-
it's
but-
not, but-
Wait, let
Okay,
me
go
finish.
ahead.
But I think it's up to us to see if we can somehow or other get the politicals involved to
Mhm.
where they got the health department in to
Yeah.
answer some
Yeah.
community concerns.
That's good. I
Yeah,
agree with that.
yeah. We have to look at contamination.
Mhm.
You know, we're not qualified to determine if they find contamination, if that contamination did in fact lead to these illnesses.
Mhm.
That's for somebody else to figure out. But, you know, we need to do what we can to protect the community. And
Yeah, I see what you're
we have this
saying. That's
testing.
kind of irrelevant, because if you take the West Hills baseball field and go back many, many years, there's lots of people that got cancer. But if you could do that with any site, anywhere in the world, so that probably is not the issue.
Yeah. And what happened in the past also isn't the issue. I mean, it certainly could be used as a reference or something that could help guide research. But, you know, we're concerned with today and the future.
Mhm.
And, you know, is there something right now?
Right, is there something there?
Is there something there that's affecting these people?
Okay.
And if there is, we have to make sure that the source is ended.
I think, I agree with everything that's been said. I think the key issue is to formulate a question that we can ask Barger or ask Stern. It says, hey, we have this concern, how should we deal with it? Because they got the health department out here, you know, 60 miles an hour to run up to SSFL. Well, what about the rest of the concerns that we have? How do they deal with it? And it seems to me that our politicians should tell us the steps that we should be taking.
I'm sorry, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, very quickly, because I'll forget what I was gonna say. Do you think that it's, I may have already forgotten what I was gonna say. Do you think that it would have more power if we had something come from the council or from this committee to Barger?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we can do something real quick from the committee.
I agree.
So maybe we can put something together from the committee and put it on West Hills Neighborhood Council official letterhead or whatever. We'll talk to Dan about that.
I did contact the CDC. I left those notes in my office, but it again turned into a catch-22. Everyone I spoke to would lead me to another phone call, and nobody seemed to really know. I couldn't get any kind of a definitive answer from anybody as to, you know, what was tested, where, what's the status. It was just this.
This was the CDC?
Mhm. They kept sending me to other departments and other areas. And
Well, we already know that Barger might be a good,
yeah.
a good channel to go through, because we saw it work.
I've
So-
seen it work a couple of times now. I forgot the guy's name, the guy that left office under, you know, sexual harassment.
Oh, Matt
Matt
DeBatney.
DeBatney.
But when he wrote a letter to DTSC, they responded immediately.
Yeah.
It seems to me that they are more sensitive to
Mhm.
questions coming from the politicians, if we
Right.
can just motivate the politicians. Clearly, Melissa and her group have been successful. We need to follow that example.
I'll volunteer to contact Henry Stern.
Okay. But
And you
it
want to
seems to me
contact?
they owe us an answer, because calling the agencies, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah,
They just
it's
refer
like
you to the next person
they
down
do.
the hall,
Nobody seems to know anything really.
or care.
Oh, maybe.
So I'd like to put together a letter for Barger, and if we could get information from the people who have the most information about the cancers, and, you know, that they think are coming from that site, that would be beneficial.
Yeah,
So-
I was thinking that perhaps we could have a meeting open to the public, or the people who feel that there's something to be investigated, we get their names and sort of
The chair
get a
has his
force behind
back to
this to go to Barger and say, look, here are
Maybe
10,
through.
20 people who want this examined.
Yeah, I'm not gonna, personally, I'm not gonna contact John Berg directly because of some of the mistreatment that
Or
I've
maybe we don't
been
even
exposed
need.
to. But I would like to have the names of the people, and maybe Bonnie Clee can get it for us. We can ask her.
She's been pretty uncooperative.
Well, I can ask her.
Or maybe we can just address it as a number of people, a number of
We can do that as well.
constituents, without any names. That might even be better.
I think that's a good idea, and it seems to me that whether it's Stern or Barger
Or both.
or Englander or whoever,
Well,
the man who is never there, if
He hasn't
they
even
could
been in
tell us
meetings
what the
yet.
process is and participate in making it happen.
yeah, he's kind of,
He's
he's like gone already.
He's gone.
Yeah, so I don't know if we could, that might be a waste of time at this point.
I think we should go through
we're better-
Barger.
Yeah,
Um,
me too.
I'll go ahead maybe tomorrow if I can.
Okay.
I'll put something together and then I'll send it to you guys.
Okay, and I'll contact Henry
A
Stern.
staff guy that we dealt with before. I forgot
At
her-
is it Barger? Barger? What's her name?
I think it's Catherine Barger, I think.
Yeah,
I think
okay.
so.
I think so too.
Okay.
All right, so is there anything else anybody wants to suggest? Any other future projects or things that we should look at? Christina?
I'd like to request an independent investigation on the public health effects from the Woolsey fire that affect West Hills. Air pollution specifically.
Who do you want investigated?
An independent investigation of the health effects affecting West Hills from the Woolsey fire.
Okay.
When you say independent, like,
Yeah.
who do you mean though?
Like, I don't want DOE investigating DOE, I want
Yeah.
an independent agency that is not the polluter looking at it. I want transparency where the public can be provided data instead of denials without any substantiated fact behind it.
I think we're in a strange world where nobody is believed.
Yeah, I mean,
And
the,
now-
Well, data's data, and my request is that be
Let me
made.
finish. I have no problem in putting it forward. The question is, we're gonna have the health department investigated by who?
Yeah.
The
No,
politicians?
I think the health department, I mean, at some
No,
point-
we want the surrounding area investigated independently of the polluters,
Okay, I understand what you're saying,
so that we can be
The
provided
results.
data, and it shouldn't be about gamma scanning the site that didn't burn. That isn't what is interesting. We want
Well,
content of
What
ash.
is it that you want investigated then? Areas or?
Ash impacts, what chemical constituents and what radiological constituents are present in the ash. If they wait for weeks before they even sample, of course, they'll conveniently never know. But to me, that's important information. And meanwhile, I believe that the especially West Hills, but the whole surrounding area should be given precautionary measures so that they can protect themselves, because truly that is the best way to prevent future health impacts. Instead of fighting over it, help people. That's my request.
I have seen a lot of those precautions that you were addressing before online in the last few days.
Yeah, there were several.
Yeah.
of them.
Well, they should come from the city of Los Angeles. They should be helpful. I don't know, that's why I came here, and instead you all said it wasn't on the agenda,
One of them looked,
so I'm disappointed,
One of them looked pretty official.
but that's not
If
new.
I can find it now.
The thing is, it's a fine line between our committee and public health. And
Yeah.
also emergency preparedness.
Right. Well, and it's also, this is Wednesday. The evacuation from my home was just lifted 8:30 on
It is
Monday
precisely
night.
now that people need precautionary measures.
Well, I understand, but, you know.
30 schools are closed, but Hale is open and kids are playing in the dirt. I think it's sad. That's in, I guess it's Woodland Hills, so you don't care? Maybe, I don't know.
No, it's not that we don't care. It's
Well,
that
I think
want-
I think we should be concerned about that. All horizontal surfaces should be cleaned, all filters should be replaced,
Yeah, I
all
did read that
people
today.
should be wearing masks outdoors, and there shouldn't be like PE, they shouldn't be exercising.
I don't
You
think
shouldn't
we're the
overwork your
source for
lungs.
that.
Yeah,
I think
I mean, we
should
don't
get
have
the
control
agency to
over
come
this
out and
LA.
do
Well, then
that.
ask them to, then ask them.
Okay, anything else?
I don't think so. Oh, I do have one question. You mentioned about a letter that we would take to the board. So, now that wasn't really on the agenda, so where are we going with this?
A letter that we would take to.
Regarding,
I'm not sure. Who is that? Who are we talking about sending a letter to? I guess it was Barger or Barger or
Yeah,
whatever.
yes.
I don't know, we'll have this thing with their name. And Henry Stern. So we could do a committee letter.
right, I think that's faster,
Yeah, it is.
and, you know.
Just kind of a generic thing to, you know, changing the names.
Right,
And to let them know what it is we're requesting.
I think we should, I like the idea, and I think the things that Christina's bringing up, we can include that, and I think the question is, what do you advise us to do?
Yeah.
yeah.
Because is this a safety committee, is it an environment committee, or whatever? Regardless, there should be some agency out there that says, these are the steps that should be taken.
Mhm.
Okay.
I mean, I think this committee really, it has kind of taken on some of the public
Yeah.
safety.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Or there is none.
Or maybe we need to lead the way.
And the
Yeah.
health committee
Yeah.
doesn't really
No.
do anything other than post things on our Facebook page every month.
Get flu shots.
Yeah, I mean, their meeting is like, their meeting usually lasts 1 to 2 minutes.
Really?
That's a joke.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's all I've got.
Okay, that's all I have. That's enough.
When appropriate, I'd like to make a comment.
Yes, please.
I'd like to talk about the video that was done in regards to the presentation that was made. And there's been some discussion about whether or not something was done intentionally that made anybody look bad or evil intent. There was none. And let me start off by saying, when the video was done, the presentation was over here.
Right.
pretty much the way you see the room right now is the way it was laid out there. And the camera, which I'm pointing at right now, is a good, 40 feet away? So it's not very close. You have to decide when you're filming something, what's important to show, where to focus on. And when the presentation was made, there were a lot of pictures that were sitting here on the table that the presenter picked up and was showing the audience. Now, this is not the size of the pictures that were being shown, but they were held about waist high, most about this big, maybe up to here. They weren't giant posters that covered the presenter's head. They were things that were, if you look at the video, were held right about at this level. So when I shot the video, I determined that it was better to focus on the item that was being presented, which was held down here, versus try to get a larger shot of everything going on, because from that distance, you really wouldn't be able to see what the picture was that the presenter was showing.
Detail, yeah.
Detail. And because I'm shooting this as a video for the internet, there are people who'd be watching the presentation who wouldn't know what the subject was, what the item was that was being showed. So rather than have a wide shot that didn't show any detail, just because what I saw is what I saw in the camera at the time, I chose to focus on the picture that's being shown so that the audience on the internet could see what was being referred to while the presenter was talking. So there was no evil intent. No one asked me to make the video look a certain way. My idea was to help people watching on their computers or on a phone be able to see the item that was being shown or being referred to give them a better idea of what the topic was. So if anything, it was helping the presentation in the sense that people watching on their phones or their computers on a smaller format could actually see the item that was being talked about and therefore make it more understandable based on what they were hearing from the presenter. If you also look at the video, you'll see that anytime an item is not being held at waist level, then the entire presenter is being shown in the video. There's nothing that I said, there's nothing that I was told, there's nothing written down that shows or proves in any way, shape, or form that there's any sort of evil intent or that something was being misrepresented or shown in a bad way. The other thing I'd like to say is there are part 1 and part 2 to those videos. The only reason why there's a part 1 and a part 2 is the entire meeting lasted for quite a long time. So in terms of being able to upload the videos in a reasonable amount of time, they were cut into 2 parts. And it didn't make sense to cut it exactly in half, where the presentation would be in part 1 and part 2. I felt for the sake of continuity to have the entire presentation in the first part, and then after that was over, show the rest of the meeting, because don't forget, in part 2, you also discussed other items that were on the agenda. So it isn't about anything in favor of anybody versus somebody else. This was about
And what is your name, sir?
continuity. This is about making sure that everything flows from part 1 to part 2.
What is your name, sir?
What we'll do then is.
What is your name, sir? You won't tell me?
Patrick.
What is your name?
Take that into account when we.
You're Patrick Uzemek, right?
Thank you very much.
Thanks. How
All right.
disrespectful.
It's 8:14 and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll go home to a peace and quiet.
Me too.
I could be aggressive.
He just called me aggressive. So they'll be deleting the videos, I'm imagining now. Since now they have to pretend that they say something that they don't. Fucking disgusting people. Unbelievable.